anytime we're centering older adults on stage, we are really fighting ageism. We're really making folks that sometimes can be invisible in society to be visible, front and center. There's always incredible benefits. And I would say that creative aging arts education programs in theater arts just really ensure that those benefits are related to building skills, and that the programs are also creating really in-depth opportunities for folks to socially engage.
In this roundtable discussion, Lifetime Arts invited Diantha Dow Schull, Julie Kline, and Ed Friedman to discuss the benefits of creative aging programs in the theater arts for older adults. Through their research, knowledge, expertise, and personal experience in older adult theater programming, they share how this modality supports skill building, creative expression, and social engagement in older adults.
So I just want to start off by asking, how are these creative aging programs in the theater arts related to senior theater and regular theater? And also, how are they different?
I think first I just want to say that, the term senior theater is so wide and also kind of undefinable in some ways, I would say. I guess I would say that it is definitely, theater that centers around older adults, puts them on stage or involves their voices in theatrical pieces. It could also be intergenerational. It could be improvisational. It could be oral history based work, which is something that I do a lot of. And in terms of creative aging programs in the arts, I think the elements of putting older adults on stage or involved in productions have incredible benefits. I would say that creative aging programs specifically are going to put an emphasis on skill building through that process, and also making sure they're really consciously placed moments and opportunities for social engagement between the folks involved. So while any project that involves older adults in theater is senior theater, and should be celebrated and has incredible benefits both for the performers or creators, artists, but also for the audience, of course, too, because I'd say that anytime we're centering older adults on stage, we are really fighting ageism. We're really making folks that sometimes can be invisible in society to be visible, front and center. There's always incredible benefits. And I would say that creative aging arts education programs in theater arts just really ensure that those benefits are related to building skills, and that the programs are also creating really in-depth opportunities for folks to socially engage. Theater naturally has a sort of social engagement component, right? It's an ensemble. We're all up there together, often in the moment of performing together, the sort of terror and fear and shared vulnerability of being on stage in front of an audience tends to bring people together. But in a creative aging arts education program, the teaching artist, the leader of the program, would really ensure that those social engagement moments are happening throughout the process.
I think the distinction between the creative aging programs and trainings and what we would call normal theater, community theater, professional theater, improv, radio theater, whatever, is that those programs and trainings are deliberately organized to build the skills that Julie was talking about, to foster the social relationships, and in a sense, I think, to produce that sense of well-being and achievement and purpose that then can perhaps be a pathway to going on and participating in the outside world in normal theater. So it's more of an internal impact. The participation of older adults in that normal theater, in whatever form it may take, whatever setting it has, community or residential, then has an impact on the external audience. So both, they're very overlapping. They both build skills and confidence and relationships and cognition, which is something I have found the researchers are really determining, which is fascinating. But the trainings are for internal benefit more, and the participation in the community certainly has external benefit on all audiences in multiple ways.
In senior theater, right, there's, if we're going to use that term, older adults just participating as performers or as actors in a piece that's already been written, maybe by, a living playwright, maybe they're working with a classic piece. And that has incredible benefits. And I've, taught and directed sort of scene study with older adults, and I'm an actor myself. So I find that just performing, really is an incredible challenge and an incredible experience to step into someone else's shoes. I would sort of argue, though, that I think there are even more benefits when the older adults themselves are involved in the creation of the theatrical piece, whether by writing, whether by, co-conceiving with a director or teaching artist, developing through improv, but when sharing their own stories, there is a term called reminiscence theater, which is exactly that, sort of the idea of pieces of theater, performance pieces or plays created out of the older adults' own memories and experiences. I would say that there's sort of even more benefits. And to me, that kind of work is just selfishly a little more exciting to me, because then the folks that are on stage are actually sharing more deeply of themselves. And I'm not only seeing them on stage, which I think has a positive effect, I and the audience, I'm also learning from their life experience and from their memories. So I just wanted to throw that in there as another distinction.
My hope is always that a creative aging program is a gateway drug to people going on and doing this on their own outside of the 8 or 10 sessions they were in, and I think it kind of builds them the confidence to do this, whether as a performer or a writer. So, and I think that's important, and I think that it always seemed to me that one of the things that ought to happen is that those next steps should be encouraged and maybe researched to see where they are in a community.
Ed, could you share a little bit about what it's been like to participate in the theater as a younger person, a middle-aged person, and an older person?
It's interesting. I really see a distinction between people that have been doing this for a while and people who very often in creative aging, they're taking their first steps or they're rekindling something from a long past. I've been at this for a while, but got a relatively late start when it comes to theater. I don't think I stepped foot on a stage till I was 30, and I did not have any training. I had small parts in community theater, and I learned from the people that I worked with, from directors, from other actors, went to more plays, got more immersed in this, got more parts, developed more confidence. And, I felt like, okay, I have an idea of what I'm doing, but there's always so much to learn. When I got to what you would call middle-aged, I'm still aspirational, fantasizing about, parts I'd like to play, but became awareness of what type I am. I'm not the leading man type, so you get aware of that, but was able to take on some more challenging roles where I could, be on stage almost in certain cases, the whole play, understanding the medium more, got into directing, got into writing. I just grew my interest and skills, took some class. And as I got older, noticed a few things. There are fewer roles that are written for older actors. I found myself doing more writing. Also, I found myself less desperate to get on stage. When you're younger, there are a lot of things that appeal to your ego. Somebody says, "Oh, you'd be great for this," and immediately, okay, I'm going to do this because somebody said this. Now it's like, no, I'm not going to drive an hour to do this part. It's not that important to me. But the other thing that happens is the self-imposed ageism that is, rampant in our society. As aware of it as I am, I'm not immune to it. So when you hear people say, well, I can't learn lines anymore, it starts to get into your head. And, I start every time now I get on stage, I'm thinking, is this the time I'm going to I'm not going to be able to remember my lines. And I keep hearkening back to a few years ago, seeing a revival of the Gin Game with James Earl Jones and Cicely Tyson, who were like 87 and 92 at the time. And they're on stage virtually. No, not virtually. They're on stage the entire play. And I'm thinking, well, this is a case for, if you're doing it, keep doing it and keep that muscle exercise, then you'll be okay. And that's how I'm thinking about this right now.
I love doing that full reflection from Ed, and it made me think about the older adults that I work with in theater programs or pieces. And most of my work has been in New York City, right? So the range of experience in theater of the folks that I work with is incredible. So I might have somebody maybe like Ed that sort of came to it later in life and is expanding their skills and their interest in it. I might have somebody that was formerly on Broadway, who was a professional actor or dancer or singer. I worked with somebody who came to cabaret singing in her 40s and was a pretty huge star in the cabaret world, and I got to work with as part of a piece. Especially playwrights, older adult playwrights tend to come to programs. To me, all of the theater is sort of a master art form, meaning you can really, truly spend your life, getting better and better. But I especially think something like playwriting is, the more experience, the more life experience you have, the more that, you can lend to your work, the richness of your work. And then I have people that are totally new to it, as Ed was saying too, and who maybe really have a story to tell, and that it just feels like this is the right art form to tell that story. So I love sharing the story of an older gentleman I worked with in a theater program who had been a civil engineer. He had never been on stage, but he had really come to this point in his life really wanting to share his stories, especially his time in the military. And I enticed him into this theater class, and he really became the center of the play because he had these incredible stories to share about his career, his life in, going to the Cooper Union early in his early years. Just a lot of fascinating things to share that became great fodder for a theatrical piece. And so he really became the center of it, though he had no previous theater experience. So it's exciting that all different types of folks with different experience can be a part of this. And I just wanted to add one thing about what Ed was saying too, in terms of memorization, right? These concerns around memory that have to do with being in a play, the physical concerns about being in a play. And a lot of my work in leading these productions is to really ease that, take that out of the equation. We do a lot of physical work in the plays that I direct. We just as well can sit in the chair, share a story. We can hear the audio recording of someone's story. If they don't feel comfortable with memorization, they can improvise their story. When I worked with the intergenerational theater company, Roots and Branches, that was young people and older folks. And it was part of the choreography of the blocking that whenever an older adult who might need help, not everybody does, but those who did, a younger actor was part of assisting them on and off stage or moving that chair to where they needed. And it was just part of it was kind of this gorgeous choreography as part of the blocking of the piece. It wasn't external to the theatrical experience. It was part of it. And I really think that's beautiful and expressive of just who people are and these things that we all probably are going to go through as we age.
From what I'm hearing and what I agree with is this art form is hardcore. You're using so many different skills at once. So I can see where an older adult participant may feel intimidated or hesitant to try this art form, especially if it's their first time trying it. And they may develop their own internal ageism, like you've mentioned, Ed. So how do these programs really bury these ageist thoughts internally inside these participants, as well as the external ageism? And how do these programs unbury sort of this newfound confidence that you see with these older adults as they participate in these programs?
Well, during my preparation of a piece about participatory drama, I did a lot of looking at the research and the literature. And I just happened by chance to have this quote in front of me from a pair of researchers who are very well known in the field, and they're one of the few that have actually looked at participation in theater arts and its impact on older adults in terms of cognition in a whole range of ways. They say, after studying 77 studies of older adult participation, that the literature highlights the benefits and value of older people's theater and drama participation, particularly on health and well-being, group relationships, and learning and creativity. And then they go on in another section to talk about the impact on cognitive process, which of course is the one that many of us worry about as we age. And that good acting is a highly complex cognitive process that involves retrieving the dialogue and the movements from long-term memory, but using them spontaneously. So in terms of the internal aging, I think there's no doubt, and listening to both of you discuss this, that the impact of the creative aging training programs and even the workshops provided by bigger theaters has strong internal impact. And as if it can even be a pathway to going on and doing more, that's great. What I don't think we think enough about is the response of the audiences to seeing older adults, whether they are acting out their own life stories and their reminiscences, or whether they're taking on classical roles or roles of a younger person. And I don't think we can quantify those impacts, but I have to believe that in the aggregate, as more and more older people participate in theater and intergenerational theater and every kind of theater, the notion that older adults are inevitably wacky and weak and can't move across the stage has to break down. So I'm just sort of adding some random thoughts to what you're saying about the ageism and the impact on internal and external perceptions of age.
I was in a production of Much Ado About Nothing, and I was the oldest person in the cast by about 30 years. And outside of some of the references people were making backstage to pop culture, I felt I fit in fine. And what I noticed, I didn't notice this until sort of after it was all over, is that there were no concessions, there were no considerations, there was no pointing out that I didn't have to do something because I'm older, or you don't have to move this piece of furniture, or we're gonna let you slide on knowing your lines and stuff like this. I felt like this was a real sort of meritocracy. If you can do the part, you're part of the cast. And that's and you're expected to do what everybody else is doing. There's no acknowledgement even, which in retrospect was actually quite good. I hope for a situation where we don't sort of trap our older adults only in the past, only speaking in terms of their past in what they've done. It sort of speaks to the idea that this is over and I can just reflect rather than coming up with something new. And I think that kind of thing should be encouraged. An interesting take on this for me was a production a few years ago of this theater in Minneapolis that did a production of Hair using only actors over 55 or over 60. And the whole idea was these were people who lived through that period, as opposed to the ages of a traditional cast of Hair, which would all people be in their 20s probably. And I thought that was pretty ingenious, and I thought it sort of gives a context that somebody who's 22 is not going to have.
Two other things that come to mind is a little bit is related to what Ed was saying in terms of inside of a theater production. There an ensemble is really built, and some of it is through the process, and some of it is a little what I think based on what I shared before, which is sort of a shared vulnerability, like, oh gosh, we're all on stage together. It bonds people very quickly. And I think that within that community, just like Ed was saying, it's often sort of transcends a lot of typical cliches that we have about each other. And I saw that especially in, again, an intergenerational setting, right? It's like we are coming together, we're going to create and then perform a play together. Age becomes pretty meaningless in that process, right? And the ideas we might have about each other really fade away once we're in what is truly a group creation. The other thing is the capacity in theater to fully step out of yourself, to fully step into somebody else's shoes, to step into another character. Again, with the intergenerational work, that was young folks playing older folks, that was a 10-year-old playing a 40-year-old, that was a 93-year-old playing a 6-year-old. And I think there's just something very freeing about any of our conceptions about ourselves, whether they be based on age or elsewhere, being able to just fully step into the character of someone else. I think that can really free us internally. And I think it can shake up an audience's perceptions around age as well.
Obviously, there's so many skills being used with this art form. What are these different skills, different skill areas related to theater arts? And how are these taught to the older adults? How do they master these in a creative aging program?
Right. So I appreciated, Jacqueline, when you said theater is hardcore, because I agree. And in fact, it's using really one's full self. So there's a lot of different skills that are involved. You were building skills in our voice, vocal strength, the ability to project, ability to articulate, communicate via voice and language. There's physical skills around a kind of aliveness in the body, an energy in the body that's sort of required when you're on stage. I think that energy, like I use that word because I think it can take many forms. So that energy can be in the body, even if you are sitting in a chair on stage. Character work, as I just mentioned, right? This idea of being able to play somebody else, transform yourself, step into somebody else's shoes. A big thing I've had a lot of fun, I think, teaching to older adults in theater is I think Anne Bogart uses the term SOTS for this, but I would say it's like a sense of readiness, a sense of being in the moment, a quick ability to respond. In improv, that's all you're doing, right? You're just in the moment responding to what your partner or the group is giving you. But even if you have a scripted play, you still need to be in the moment, responsive. And so that's something I actually think is really a skill and really something that folks can learn and grow over time. And then all the basics of storytelling. What is the structure for a story? What is the arc of a story or a character? And that's something that's developed whether you're telling your own story, via an oral history based work, whether you're working in a quote unquote regular play, whether you're doing improvisation, a sort of internal sense of what makes a story, what makes a scene or a whole play really work is something that I think we are all constantly developing in the theater.
What are some of the trends that you have observed in the research and theater arts programming? Mm-hmm. Were there any surprises to you in what you have uncovered or particular models that you've seen dominate? And is this a good thing?
Well, we have touched on one of the trends, and I think Ed has been very articulate in speaking about the power of the peer-led groups that have emerged of older adults who come together to share stories of their lives, to build their own skills without necessarily professional leadership, to create productions that will attract others. And I've just been very moved by the strength of the work that has come out of these very community-based groups. I think I was most moved by the first one I was looking at, which was something called the Older Adult Ensemble Group, under the umbrella of the Tetchley Arts Centre in South London, which is quite a poor and very diverse area of London. And that group was formed, I think it was about 8 years ago, to do work on the life stories of the individuals involved. They felt their life stories weren't heard or known, that they weren't visible, and it had to do with just being acknowledged as contributing members of the community who had something important to tell. And as they've gone along, they've gained confidence. They've done more varied productions. They did production Bed that I have referenced in memos to you and that I plan to highlight as one of those in a piece I'm writing. And to the point where recently they changed their name to Glorious Age. And I just think that sort of sums up the evolution of this group from frustration to celebration and a sense of real achievement and purpose. They now know they have something to tell. It's not necessarily about age even. It's about their own special lives. And each production is quite different. So that trend, and there really are a lot of these peer-led groups, often they are from a logistical, practical point of view under the umbrella. The Old Vic Theater, the Stage Bridge Company in San Francisco has an older adult ensemble. There are really quite a few, and I think that that's an important aspect of this, how participatory drama is engaging more people more intentionally, as with more agency and more self-confidence. The other thing that didn't surprise me, but as I worked on this piece about participatory drama and aging, I harked back to the first spotlight that I wrote for the Creative Aging Resource for Lifetime Arts, which was about this 100-year life that we're all facing. And based on new research out of the Stanford Center on Longevity, but upheld by lots of new research that says many of us, my grandchildren, are likely to live possibly to 120. And yet, culturally and imaginatively, we all know we haven't caught up by two of those realities. And it occurred to me just in thinking about this conversation we're having that, and I found myself quite surprised to think that perhaps narrative theater created based on the lives of those of us who are living longer and have so much to tell. We not only have one story to tell, everyone has one story to tell. We know that from StoryCorps, but we may have multiple stories to tell. And how does that make up a longer life that is meaningful in our socio-cultural context? And so I'm just thinking that maybe this whole trend towards more participation by adults in all kinds of theater may be one way that we can begin to open up our minds to conceiving of a future longer life.
Thank you, Diantha. Yeah, and I think your talk about, the first newsletter that you curated and created of the 100-year life, I think it's a great way to segue into this final question for everybody. What is the future of creative aging programming in this art form?
One of the things I'm seeing is a stronger emphasis in storytelling. And I don't mean storytelling in theater, I mean actual storytelling. It's kind of like theater adjacent, but to me, it's all theater. But the idea of, and Julie alluded to this before about understanding the arc of a story. I think that's going to be an accessible entryway into telling and performing stories for older adults. I see a challenge in that either what we're calling now senior theater, while it has tremendous benefits for the participants and Diantha mentioned this earlier, for the audience who sees this. I've always felt that when we started Lifetime Arts, that the fact that people are up there, whether it's a performance of a play or an exhibition, people who are coming there to view it are looking at people modeling behavior that if they're not in it, they can do it. So there's tremendous benefit for those older adults that are attending. But when I think about the potential for changing how younger people think about this, the reality is, people in their 20s, 30s, 40s are not going to senior theater unless their grandmother's in it or something. So how do we create vehicles that have a wider reach and can portray older adults as full human beings, but in vehicles that are going to have a wider distribution.
Another trend, which I might have talked about, is the intergenerational theater. I see that that's growing, and it's growing in many parts of the world. And I think that may be one answer to your question, is how do we engage people of all ages in experiencing the stories of all ages? And so that's really very interesting to me. And maybe somehow Lifetime Arts can be more deliberative about this. I think that some of the workshops and training that Lifetime Arts does do involve intergenerational work. And that might be something we want to be very intentional about.
We were just speaking the other day, Diantha, about developing our intergenerational trainings and programs. So that's apropos. And basically, Ed said my answer too, which was kind of, I want both things, right? Like I want more recognition of these senior, for lack of a better term, senior theater organizations and long-term ensembles like Jerry Actors, like Stage Bridge, the work that folks are doing on developing, these skills in this particular demographic. I want them to just be known, to be supported, to be funded. And at the same time, I want there to be more integration of older adult theatrical creators, whether they be writers or actors or anything. I want them to be more integrated in professional theater performances, in the mainstream, more, as I think Ed was alluding to. And it's happening. I mean, I think, like every art form, folks are recognizing that the demographics are changing, that there are, more and more older adults, that older adults want to stay more and more engaged. And so every art form, I think, is being affected by this. But I definitely have seen an uptick in recent professional theater, sort of like Ed was talking about, that production of Hair, or I know a recent production of Romeo and Juliet at Hudson Shakespeare Festival, directed by Gay Taylor Upchurch, where the Romeo and Juliet were married older adults, and that changes the storyline significantly, and I think makes it richer. And there's there's more and more examples of professional companies really centering older adults. So I sort of want both. I want there to be more integration, and I also want these groups that are really focused on older adults to keep growing and to keep being supported.
To receive more information about this topic and other topics related to the creative aging field, please visit the Creative Aging Resource website at creativeagingresource.org and sign up for our newsletter at creativeagingnews.substack.com. To learn more about our work and impact in this field, visit the Lifetime Arts website at lifetimearts.org.